Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arno, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
All right. Hey, Andrew.
Good morning, Dave.
So what are we doing today?
So today we're going to talk about a topic that I think can be pretty controversial. It definitely creates conversations. And even as we prepared for this, we've had a lot of conversation. You've had your men's group and I've had some readings to do in preparation for all of this. And it's the topic of masculinity.
Yeah. And I think to be, completely transparent with the listeners, this is our second go at this. So our previous recordings were done in one shot. And this one obviously is a bit more challenging, I think, and trying to sort out where we fit within this topic and kind of what we know from research or experience and our own experience as being male and being men in this society that we're living in. And I think part of the reason that we're doing this at this time was the interview offer that you had, Andrew, about the Netflix miniseries Adolescence.
Yeah, so we decided to skip over some topics that we had planned and go straight to masculinity because we were approached by CTV, a morning show, to go on air to speak about toxic masculinity. And this was really spurred on by the Netflix show Adolescence. Oh, by the way, if you haven't watched it, there may be some spoilers here. So if you want to watch it first before listening to this episode, by all means, please do. So there's the caution there. If we wanted to throw out there may be some spoilers. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great show. I think it can create a lot of conversation about school, socialization, the role of teenage boys and men, like so many different things that we can probably talk about, even about each episode of that series. But this is why we're talking about it. It's not a new topic. It's something that I think throughout time, since the beginning of civilization, we've known that there are differences between men and women, physically, physiologically, but I do think that the world is changing. You can go back 30 years ago, and I think people, men, women, they would just say, okay, this is my role. I accept it. And you do what you need to do as a man. I do what I need to do as a woman, and so be it. But I think within probably the last 15 years or so, 15 to 20 years, there's been a movement to question, are these rules so fixed? Are they so simple and so black and white that men do this and women do that? Can men not be seen as the aggressors? Can men slow down? Can men get in touch with their emotions and feelings and actually share them with other people? In doing some of the research and preparation for this episode, for toxic masculinity, for those who don't know, it is defined as sort of an extreme form of masculinity. When we talk about, is masculinity toxic? There's masculinity in and of itself, and when it becomes toxic, then I think the definition is now, okay, is somebody out to use violence, bullying tactics? Is there intention to hurt? Is there malice behind what they're doing? That to me is toxic masculinity, because now they're taking actions into their own hands to hurt somebody else. And I think in the Netflix show, this is why it's causing this discussion to come up about toxic masculinity, because right from the get-go, they're not hiding it. The boy killed the girl.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he uses violence after being bullied online.
For sure. And I think this happens all the time in society. Like a tragedy happens and then everyone goes, how did this happen? Right. And I think that's what this show tries to challenge or address or at least kind of put some ideas out there that like what were the factors that would contribute to a 13-year-old boy killing another, 13-year-old girl? Like, how does this even happen? Right.
Yeah.
So I had a nice conversation with some of the other facilitators for the men's group last night after the group, and one of them made a really nice, or really like, I thought a point that just hit home for this. It's like masculinity is not toxic, just like positivity is not toxic, but we can have toxic positivity, right? There's
Yeah.
something that's good in and of itself could be bad at some point. And so we're not saying boys and men and masculinity is bad. We're
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
that, yeah, when does it become toxic or
Yes.
problematic?
Yeah. I think throughout history, masculinity's been around, right? This idea that, if we go back to the beginning of civilization, the hunter-gatherer, part of that was being masculine, going out to gather food, going out to use your strength to forage, cut down trees, find things to eat, go fish, whatever it is. People also probably, according to anthropologists, they work together much better back then, um, in terms of men and women and doing what they needed to do to be altruistic. But it wasn't until later that with the growth of civilization, and this is all based on my readings, by the way, but the growth of civilization and agriculture, that men and women's roles become more and more defined into what we know of it now. So the need for more land, the ability to go into the farms and ride a wagon, it was much more dangerous for women to do that. So then men were like, okay, I'll take over this. You go home and you take care of the household. And that's when those gender roles started to be revealed to what we know of it today. But then people wanted more land, politics evolved, people wanted more land, not just for themselves, now for their country, wars, colonization, this proliferation of aggression. We go and beat up another country, we loot them, we take what they have, we enslave them. This is socialization, right? But on a big, big stage.
Well, and I have to jump in with like patriarchy, right? Like that the actual value of a man versus a woman, right? Like, and how does that play out? And I think, yeah, there are differences, physical differences between the sexes, but we're not from different planets, right? Like, I think sometimes we exaggerate these differences and you call them like definitions or they become more defined. I think they become more restrictive when they become rigid.
Yes.
So part of what we want to do today is just look at some of those definitions, look at some of those like the way that those can be helpful and great, and in other ways get in the way of being healthy and happy. And
Well, Dave, what you talked about there, like being more restricted, I was reading a book by Edward Adams and Ed Freundheim, and they talk about confined masculinity. I think it goes along with what you're saying in terms of those restrictions, is that throughout time and socialization, men learn that, to be called a man, you have to fit this particular bill of masculinity, right? Which is to be competitive, perhaps even ultra competitive, be aggressive. If you're pushed, you push back harder, right? So you don't show that you have any vulnerability. And I think that's a big word in today's episode too, is vulnerability. Like you don't show that. But even to our conversation before we started recording, my problem with that is that not everybody is built the same. As I was saying, like even for my son, like he cries. I would say that he probably cries a little easier when he's hurt, emotionally hurt, I mean. And if I were to say, you know what, you're not allowed to cry, and I invalidate those emotions, sure, over time, he might say to himself, okay, I've learned that I cannot cry. I'm not allowed to cry. But that's not him,
Mhm.
right? His foundation, his makeup is perhaps a child who is very in touch with his emotions and from time to time needs to get it out. But if I deny that, you know, you're closing off that predisposition of his. And in due time, I mean, working in this field, I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of men, I've seen a lot of teenage boys that over time, those cracks start to show up because they've buried those emotions over and over and over again. And this is where I think a lot of men fall into depression. They fall into suicidal ideations because they've never felt like themselves.
Yeah, or they lash out in violence too, right? Like they just feel like they have been disenfranchised or they have been, they don't have a place in society or in groups, and it can come out as like they've been hurt and they can hurt back. And so I think the risk of like you said, burying, but I think about it like hiding. Like, how much of yourself are you hiding to be in a group of people, whether it's your family, whether it's a social group, whether it's online, whatever it is. And the more you're hiding, the more risk that it's going to be hard on you. It's going to take a lot of energy. It's likely going to invalidate kind of who you are, naturally. But you were talking, and I was thinking, I did a workshop when I was in first year university or second year university, and it was, I can't remember the whole details about it, but the thing that really has stuck with me over all this time was the instructor wrote "gay" on the board, and circled it, and it was a whiteboard, and then everyone got to say words that were associated with that word, right? So it's like kind of a free association. But if we did that with man, like if you just put man, what does it mean to be a man on a board? And then everyone got to throw out words. I almost did this with my boys this morning, but I didn't have time. I was going to ask them, like, what words do they connect with man or boy and see what they come up with. And so some of them that have been, pretty commonly referred to in terms of masculinity is that competitiveness,
Yep.
aggressiveness, strength, self-reliance,
Well, think
even.
about even sports, right? I know we're in North America, we're in Canada, so I'm gonna use this as an example. North American sports. So many years, decade after decade after decade, it's only been men who are profiled, who are put on the stage to compete, right? Whether it's basketball, football, baseball. It's not until recently, is there a women's hockey league? Is there, the WNBA? Like those are still very much a young platform for women to show that they can compete too.
Hmm.
But it's always been men who have been put on the stage to show, okay, look, you're the warriors, go out there and compete.
Well, and beat your body up and don't have no regard for your own like well-being. Yeah, I think that warrior mentality or this like soldier mentality,
Yeah.
right? And it's been promoted and it's been reinforced. But like what's the cost to that for boys and men, right?
Well, which is brutal. I mean, we didn't even talk about this, but as you're talking about that warrior mentality, post-traumatic stress, like it's well documented that people who go to war, and this is a fact that men, mostly it's men going to war, not discounting the women here, but for those who say, men are strong, men don't have feelings, or men have to overcome their feelings, tell me about post-traumatic stress, right? Why are there droves of soldiers who are men coming back with PTSD,
Hmm.
right? And they feel like they can't cope, they struggle, they have their hallucinations, they have their nightmares, they fall into depression, anxiety, and ultimately for some, suicide.
Hmm. Well, I fundamentally believe that when violence hurts the person who is the receiving end of it and the person who is, the perpetrator or the one like acting out the violence, if it is like a one direction thing. So I
Hmm.
think in some of the research about like even soldiers that have had to fire their weapon and kill someone, it hurts them also.
Hmm.
Sure, there might be rewards for it. There might be celebrated for something that they did for their country or for their side, but there is a cost. There is a cost to
Yeah.
hurting other people.
It's that idea behind that medal that they received, right? Like, so let's say they get some sort of medal from the government, thank you for your service and your bravery. But behind that medal, do we know how that person is feeling? Do we know what kind of struggles that individual may be going through? So I think, yeah, that I think there's a very confined masculinity in terms of what society thinks that men should be. But there's that movement like we talked about in the last perhaps 15 years or so where people are talking about positive masculinity or, with the book that I mentioned I was reading, this idea of liberating masculinity. It's not to say that you cannot be masculine, but is there more to being a man? Is there more to the definition of masculinity?
Yeah. Oh man. I think I always have the men's group in the back of my mind as
Of
we're having
course.
these conversations because there's just so much. I've been, doing this men's group for over 11 years and even watching the group itself evolve and the conversations that happen or yeah. And so one of the intro pieces for the group is that we don't want any racism, sexism, homophobia, any kind of putting people into categories. And the reason for that is that we want people to show up to this drop-in group
Yep.
and not have to hide who they are, right? To just be themselves and to be welcomed and included in this group. And a lot of men will nod their head with that. It's like, yeah, we get that, right? We get that that is an important thing, right? We don't know
Yep.
who's walking through the door and where they come from and what their cultural background is, their personal experiences. We just have no idea. So can we make this a space where people can feel free to be themselves?
Yeah. And I wonder, I've never attended your group. Obviously, you're all the way in Edmonton, but it'd be so interesting to even just observe. I'm thinking like when I go into a school to observe a child, I'm often a fly on the wall and I just want to see how like the whole classroom is playing out. And in essence, how does that then impact the child who I'm observing? It'd be so interesting to just be in the corner of your men's group and just watch how things unfold. I'm sure you have many people who come out, different personalities, different characteristics, and I'm sure different opinions as well.
Well, I was going to say one of the downsides of being a psychologist is that like we're not allowed to get testimonials from clients, right? Because there's
Yes,
the assumption that it's going to be biased or that they're going to become coerced or they feel pressured to. But I wish there would be an opportunity for some of the men who's actually attended the group over years to comment on these things from a, lived experience. Because yeah, but we just can't do that. We have
we
to.
can't. Yep. I'm wondering, Dave, for you, that definition of masculinity, like we've talked about that very rigid definition of perhaps what was perpetuated for decades, of what a man needs to be or how they should behave. If you were to now take it to like the 21st century and as a psychologist, somebody who works with men and mental health all the time, this idea of like positive masculinity or liberating masculinity, what would that entail for you? Like, what would that look like beyond that confined masculinity?
Yeah, I think where we can redefine and we can define for ourselves and understand that the definition is far broader. And I think that is the beauty of a group. It's people are going to have different views on it and find their own place, what it means to be a man, a father, a son. Like these things all have social kind of forces that affect them. But just to know that we get to redefine and we can find spaces that might be more supportive of who we really are, how we feel about ourselves. I,
Yep.
I worked in the oil field, right? And that
Oh,
is a
that's right.
different culture, right? And so I just think what would it be to positive masculinity? I think it would be that there's just the more ability for people to be themselves and not have to hide who they are, whether they're male, female, they, them, different, on the spectrum, just to be like, this is who I am, and this is what I like, or this is what I don't like, and for it to not be punished or shamed or humiliated. I actually thought you were going to ask me about my experience growing up and and so all these experiences just went through my head quickly. And I'm sure the listeners probably have their own like file for junior high and how they had to learn to like not do
Yeah.
certain things or not wear certain clothes or like
Yeah.
just to be able to fit into a group.
Well, I know that at my children's school, there's a lot more education around respecting individual differences, that it's okay to have tears, that it's okay to not be perfect. So I do think that there's a bit of a growth there, but I can't speak for all school systems that they're doing that. I'm assuming that perhaps that's still a minority when we talk about North American school systems. But I do think that if we can instill this idea of compassion and connection to other people, how do my actions impact others? Can I be kind? And does being kind and compassionate mean that I'm weak? I think changing that discourse as a young boy who's learning how to navigate society and the playground and their social groups, it's okay to wrap your arm around somebody else if they're crying, right? You don't have to tell somebody, oh, wipe away the tears and get up and keep playing. It's okay to ask somebody, are you okay? Do you need a few minutes? Let me bring you to the office to get an ice pack. It's okay to show that compassion.
Yeah, I think compassion and consideration, right? So we're always trying to balance like freedom, freedom of speech and freedom to be yourself, right? And to do what you want to do and act on your own kind of impulses and desires, but also to be considerate of how that's going to affect the people around you. And that is often the balance that happens in these kinds of men's groups, right? It's like we want people to be free, to be able to express themselves the way they want to express themselves, but we also want them to be considerate of, the other people that are in the room and how that is going to be, so it's not this politically correct where you can't say anything at any time, right? It's just this, and I think in society we're going back and forth and we're having these extreme conversations about it, but I think it's simpler than that.
I think one of the pieces, when we talk about, well, I'm going to dive into this a little bit, like the promotion of positive masculinity or extending oneself in terms of their masculinity, the importance of social groups. Again, the socializing piece to me is such a central figure here. The feedback that you get from other children, even as adults, like I don't know, I've been put in situations where I feel like, man, especially I think probably during university, and I was telling you this story before, where one of my roommates was in a long-term relationship. This was first year university, and his girlfriend at the time broke up with him, and he was devastated. And another roommate comes along and says, "Buddy, there's tons of girls at the bar tonight. Let's go out." Right? Like that was the response. And one of my roommates and I, we were sort of watching this unfold because the two of those guys, they were more closer friends. And it was just like, what? Did we just hear what we heard? Like he just told him to go out and find another girl. Right? Like
A lot of fish in the sea, right? You've heard that,
yeah.
right? So
And
just
that would have never been my first response. It would have been like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. What happened?" And just to promote some conversation here. But I think this is where, like, from a young age, that socialization piece is so important, where you get feedback from other kids about perhaps what you're wearing or, how you're sitting, what sports are you playing? And then right away you learn, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to figure skate, or oh, I'm not supposed to cross my legs when I sit.
yeah, you're picking up on that from our first take at this. That was one of my memories. I think it was grade 3 or 4, right? I'm sitting with my legs crossed because it felt comfortable and I was just, didn't think anything of it. And then, people were laughing and all of a sudden it was like calling me a girl and that, you must not have anything between your legs if you can sit like that. Like all of these comments. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I got to learn really quick that like I can't do that.
Yeah.
I am not going to be seen as a boy, even though at that time it wasn't like I was striving to be this like manly boy or anything
Yeah.
like that. At least that's not what I remember, but I remember the humiliation. I remember the shame. I remember the wanting to make sure that I was different so that that wouldn't happen again.
I actually did a bit of I don't know if you can call it a experiment, but I'll call it that for the sake of this. Earlier this week, so my son had a figure skating competition last weekend. It was just part of their club competition. And he's very proud of doing figure skating. And we put him in it because his sister does it. He showed some interest. So we're like, why not? And in his group, of course, he's the only boy. And so for weeks, he knew this competition was coming up. He had told his teacher, and he's like, my teacher wants you to film it. And she wants you to send it to her. I was like, okay. And he kept reminding me. So I had to do it, of course. So I filmed it, I sent it to the teacher, and she responded to my email saying that she's going to show it to the class. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so after she showed it, my son came home and I was very curious to see what his response would be. And I was just asking these probing questions like, did your teacher show it to the class? And he just sort of himself, like, he's like, yeah, yeah, of course she did. He was happy about it. And I was like, so what did other kids say? And he's like, nothing. I was like, you sure they didn't say anything? Yeah, no, people just watched and that was it. I was like, so like no comments. He's like, nope. And I believe him. He's a pretty honest kid and he wears his feelings on his sleeve. So again, I wonder if at least in that classroom it's fostered in terms of just, accept what everyone does, right?
Well, I think like as a parent, right? Most parents are trying to protect their kids, save their kids, from the pain that they went through. And so I remember even just being in Costco and looking for rubber boots, and there was black and there was pink. And I'm with my son, and he's like, I want the pink ones. And I'm like, oh no. No, you better not pick the pink ones. Like, you are going to get picked on at school. Like, bad things are going to happen. But I was like, that's his, like, just his preference, right? Like, why is that a bad thing? And I think, you probably see this in your office too. And this isn't just for men and boys. This is across, most adults that I see. Oftentimes they'll apologize for crying. And they'll
Yeah,
be like,
yeah.
I was trying to make sure I could get through the session without crying. And I'm like, Where did you learn that? Like
Yes.
you're going to therapy and you're trying not to cry. How is that helpful?
All the time. Like, where are these tears coming from? I don't know why I'm crying. I only cry when I'm here. In which case, I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad that it's a safe place for you to be yourself. But I think that kind of socialization, right? Like that direct feedback does cause a sense of fragility in people, right? And I think that's how that confined masculinity, going back to that term, perpetuates itself. Is like, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to act that way. I'm supposed to act this way. Oh, but what if sometimes I let it slip through the cracks that I do want something that's not so quote unquote masculine, right? And so I better not be like that. So I do think that it really impacts one's self-esteem and self-confidence and just causes one to be so much more fragile, right? So if someone goes against you, you better go back and beat them up for it, right? Because you got to protect that self-esteem that you're the man.
Yeah, I think that fragile self-esteem or sense of self, a lot of times when we think about self-esteem, it's related to how other people perceive us or what other people think of us naturally and where our position is in society or in the groups that we're in. But it's misled. People think that it's about praise and about compliments, and if we just tell people they did a good job, their self-esteem is going to be higher. But
Yeah.
actually, some of the research is showing that it's more about acceptance. Like accepting a child as they are will foster more self-esteem than praising them for all the good things that they've done in a day. So I think the shift there is important in terms of how important it is to feel accepted as you are. And I think that cuts to a lot of the mental health issues that we see.
And how do we feel accepted though, right? And again, it goes back to the social groups. So back to your point, like being accepted is so important, but you require that other person or that few other people to say, hey, you know what, you're hurt. It's okay. Come with us for a bit. We'll go do something else. It's so important to have that.
Well, and how it can actually be problematic, I think, is this same thing. It's like you're hurt, come with us, right? You've been rejected. You feel like, especially like say a teenage boy, nobody likes you, nobody wants to be in a relationship with you. And then you find this group online that is like, you're not alone, right? There's a lot of us, and then they start to give reasons for why you're suffering and why you're in
Yeah.
pain, and that you feel accepted, and that feels good. But all of a sudden, it can get kind of toxic.
Well, I think it's a perfect storm, right? When you talk about that, finding that group to be accepted in because they weren't able to find it in their natural environment. Now they're trying to find it elsewhere, and they're being influenced by certain messages and even personal experience. Maybe there was a girl in school who said something, an off-putting remark towards them,
Hmm.
so the experience, finding some kind of influential group, and again, going back to that sort of fragile self-esteem to find blame and cause. And so now it's like, okay, I can now generalize that it is all women who are bad, right? Because that girl said that to me. All these people I've found online say the same thing. And so therefore, I can now make this conclusion. And then the thinking and the negative thoughts about women and so on perpetuates and just grows.
It's a simple solution to a complex situation, right?
Yeah.
And so we're attracted to simple answers, I think, as humans. So like there's so many books written, it's like 5 steps to this or 3 steps to this, and just do this thing, right? So especially when we're suffering, it's like, oh, there's the answer. And we'll probably not talk a lot about this, but the Adolescence show, incel groups, and we're kind of talking around it, but like, in involuntary celibate groups, you can look this up. We're not going to, do a whole lot of time on this, but there is an answer for why you are not in a relationship or you are not having sexual relationships with people. And then the hatred that can come from that. And a lot of this gets framed as toxic masculinity, but I don't think it's much different than like a white supremacist group, right? That
Yep.
says, people with different skin color are the problem, or immigrants are the problem. It's a way of blaming
Yep.
a group for your suffering. And then all of a sudden, you can justify some pretty horrible things to that group.
Yeah, I think that that word justify, right? You can have some cognitive dissonance towards, the way you think, the way you feel, and you come up with your reasons to act a certain way, to say certain things. And I think with yeah, social media, people just feel like they have a platform to say those kinds of things wherever, whenever, because there's a buffer between the apps and the social media platforms and your fingers as you're typing away.
Well, and that, like I said earlier about being kind of, I forget what the word, like receptive or sensitive or aware of, you don't really get the feedback online. You can write something, you can turn your computer off and be gone. And if it hurts someone, you don't get to see it. Whereas face to face or, on the playground, I think there's more accountability or more responsibility, or like you just see the impact of your actions a lot more. Whereas online, you might even get a lot of support for
Yeah.
some really cruel things.
I think this is why it's so important, at least in the field that we're in, and perhaps the clients who we work with, to really help people find their genuine self. And maybe this is something that you talk about in your men's group too, like that it's okay to have feelings or to be in touch with your feelings. It's okay to have tears. It doesn't mean that you are less of a man, again, putting in quotations. That to me, I go by the way of explaining like you're human.
I agree with you, but I also like when we look at socialization, I think so many people have been taught that negative feelings are weak and they need to be overcome. They need to be pushed through. There's all of these messages about some feelings and crying specifically, right? It's just like, I'll give you something to cry about. Have you ever heard that phrase before, right? Like it's like, so this kid is crying, they're upset, they're hurt, and you are going to hurt them for expressing that hurt so that they learn to hide that hurt. And then they will be stronger, like going by this theory, right? Like it's
Mhm.
like, so the next time they get hurt, they won't cry and they won't I'm guessing where this comes from is they won't get picked on, they won't get hurt by other people, and so it'll make them stronger because they'll be less vulnerable to bullying or picked on or exclusion. But that's all because this is like socially created, right? Like that somewhere we've defined it as being weak and wrong and needing to be, stopped. And that's why apologizing for crying happens all the time.
So in your men's group then, like, do men show their feelings? Or do many of them still try to put on a veil and hide it all?
Well, like I think again, it depends on the environment, right? Is it safe to do that? And if you're having feelings, is it safe to show them? Whether that's in a family or a men's group or, your work environment, your place of employment. So I think we're always kind of gauging, like, is it okay to do certain things? And so what I've noticed is that, if someone shares and they have feelings and they're crying, it makes it a little more okay for the next person to also do the same thing, right? Depending on the response, they're kind of gauging like, ooh, that person just did this. And a lot of times when they're emotional like that, I've noticed a lot of men will like be looking down at the floor. They're not looking at the rest of the people in
Yeah,
the room. They're
they hide their faces.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
shame response,
yeah,
right? They
yeah.
feel ashamed. And so it's really powerful the odd time where I can say like, have a look around and actually kind of get that feedback that people are listening to you, they're seeing you, they're caring for you, maybe in a way that you haven't really experienced before when you've had these kinds of feelings.
I would love it. You know how professional athletes, when they get traded or they leave a team, they get tearful as they're having a press conference. I would love it if it was just one time when one of those athletes would just say, you know what, I'm crying and I'm sad. I'm just sad.
Mhm.
Instead of just, saying, I can't believe I'm crying. I told myself I wouldn't do this.
Mhm.
Who cares, right?
Oh man, you just brought up something from my history and like so my grandpa on my dad's side, he would do a prayer before the big meals whenever we had these like family gatherings, and almost without fail, every time he got to the point where he would say like, "Thank you for everyone who came and for those that are no longer with us." He would start to cry. Like he would have tears that would come out of his eyes and go down his cheeks. And so as a young boy, I just saw that that was like okay, right? Like that wasn't anything to be ashamed of. So I think that was so powerful in my socialization that allowed
Hmm.
me to feel more comfortable having tears, even though I learned later on in junior high that it wasn't okay. But just to kind of see a grown man do that in front of a whole bunch of people was, yeah, super powerful. That I think, a lot of the men that I talk to, they've never seen their dad cry. They never saw their grandpa cry. They never saw
Yeah.
another man cry. They don't even have a model for like what that would even look like.
So, in terms of moving forward, because this discussion is not going to go away and it's not going to be solved anytime soon. But if I were to ask you, is there something that you would change to promote the idea of positive masculinity or, liberating masculinity? What would be a really important factor, or maybe a couple of factors for you in terms of showing the next generation what it can be like? What would those considerations be?
Well, I think first acknowledging that, the APA has done a bunch of research and reviewed a lot of research and showing like over 40 years, like traditional masculinity, how it can be defined, is psychologically harmful for boys and men. Like it leads to negative outcomes for mental health, physical health. So just acknowledging that that can be harmful and then going like, well, what do we do different? I think about feelings as sources of information,
Yeah.
right? So I want boys and men to be in touch with their body, know what kind of things are happening, physical sensations, emotional experiences, thoughts, processes, and to be open to what does that say about you? What does that mean about who you are as your unique person in this world? right? Are you more sensitive, less sensitive? Like, I'm not saying there's one way to do this, but that we can make it okay for people to be themselves. And I keep saying this over again. I don't care if it's like male, female, but
Yep.
as soon as we start putting people into categories, it limits who they can be or who they feel they can be.
Do you want to create a curriculum for school boards around this continent?
Oh man.
You
You
know,
know,
I'm not joking.
yeah.
You
Again,
know,
I
once
don't.
once I have an idea in my head, I'm like, let's go, let's go.
Oh man, we're just starting this podcast. I don't want to like. I feel like this is just. There is going to be a lot of reactions, and I think,
Yes.
yeah. Oh man, I think just curriculum in and of itself, in terms of health curriculum, is at least in my province, has it's a
Oh, that's
very
true.
yeah. It's a very political and very controversial. So again, I have my own biases and my own views and take it for what you want it. So that's where I kind of want to leave something. I don't want to promote it as like the way that all boys should be raised, but I think we need to keep having this conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, working with so many children and teenagers, especially with the teenage boys, they're the ones who are sometimes the hardest to influence in terms of understanding that emotions, it's okay. Right? Like, to cry, to feel bad, to have compassion, like it's not a sign of weakness. So to me, from an early age, I think this idea of instilling compassion and the need to, not a need, but to have that kindness towards others, other groups, other people, just those who you see as struggling. Like it's okay to ask how they're doing, to be compassionate, to connect with other people, right? To be open to that open-mindedness. So like being able to explore their own feelings, their own experiences, to flush out their experiences and connect it back to, how does that impact you within your school? How does that impact your friends? How does that impact your teacher? So being able to think about the other in that way, and perhaps with the sense of altruism, rather than, oh, you know what? Yeah, so and so beat me on the at soccer today, and I have to get back at them. It's like be happy for them, right? So you got beat. Can you be happy for them today?
Well, yeah, I would say, feel that impulse to get back at them, feel that like, on some level it feels good to hurt someone who hurt us, right? But then also make space for the other feelings of actually feeling hurt, right? And then, oh, how do I want to respond? I think we just you talk about compassion for others, and I think about like self-compassion,
Yeah,
right? And
self-compassion,
so,
absolutely.
yeah, we talked a bit about that, and it's like, how do we treat ourselves? And then how do we treat others? And how do we want to be treated? Like all of these things, I think we can keep figuring out as a society, as a class in school, a school culture, a family culture. But you were talking, I was just like thinking Brene Brown and all the stuff she's done about like vulnerability and how like vulnerability can actually be strength, and reframing that idea of
Hmm.
what is strong. That I think is an interesting kind of piece to this, that like if you can cry in front of a group of men, is that not a display of strength, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you have been shamed and humiliated for that.
It's reframing that, right? And I think this is why I think vulnerability is so important is once we can feel vulnerable, we can explore ourselves, our own emotions, our own experiences. That can lead to then self-acceptance, self-compassion, which then I think can be translated to, okay, I'm confident in myself, right? I have that sense of self-confidence of how I feel. I'm confident with being able to express myself emotionally. And now I can also help somebody else.
Hmm.
Right. Again, it goes back. I think that analogy of like the oxygen masks in the plane is great for so many different situations. This again is like, okay, let's figure out yourself first. Put that mask on yourself first. And once you figure it out for yourself, now you can help somebody else. Right.
Yeah, I think we might have part two and part three of this conversation, but I definitely think we've started a conversation that I think the listeners can take something away from. If you agree or disagree, that's great. Like I just hopefully you can have this conversation with other people in your life and start to sort out like when do the definitions or these ideas of who we should be become problematic or become, helpful in terms of who we are. And you said vulnerability. I think vulnerability and honesty, like the more
Mhm.
honest we can be about who we are and what our needs and wants are, we can figure it out. We can figure out how to be together on this planet. I know it doesn't look like that right now in the world, but I still have hope that we can do this.
Well, thanks for that conversation, Dave. I think it was actually very intriguing. I think I hope our listeners are asking questions. And look, if we're stirring the pot, I think this is the whole point of that. We're not here to provide black and white answers. And so if this creates discussion around the water cooler, at home, wherever, I think we've done our job.
Thanks, Andrew.
Take good care.